Hey there, welcome to episode 120 of the Let's Innovate for Vegas audio program. I'm your host, Managing Director of the Innovate for Vegas Foundation, Dan Hugo. We're recording this at 10:40 in the morning on Tuesday, June 3rd, 2025. Episode 120, it's hard to believe. Today's title and topic, the business of civic volunteerism. A little bit more drill down from last week's cohort episode. If you are not familiar with the Innovate for Vegas Foundation, we are a Nevada nonprofit corporation, a 501c3 public charity. Our purpose, on file with all of these entities, is to enable and encourage ideation, innovation, and implementation to make our communities better. Fairly vague on purpose. We didn't want to spell out a specific mission statement or give the impression that we are only about code or tech. Neither is particularly true, although we are leaning that way so far based on participation, but those can all change. Innovation can take many forms, and that's one of our driving principles in general. In fact, you don't even need to innovate for Vegas specifically. You can innovate for Vegas, but without being in Vegas, and then anything we're working on would be ideally useful in other places. So we invite participation from other places so that whatever we can learn here can also be used there, wherever there is. Hopefully wherever you found this audio program. Oh, by the way, I should say we are about to turn 3 years old at the end of June. So looking forward to our third birthday, entering our fourth year. Okay, now, hopefully wherever you found this audio program, you're able to locate the episode description, which contains show notes, including a summary that I will read to you, and the usual 4 links. I was pondering finding some resources for operating a nonprofit and whatnot, but there are so many. And if you happen to be listening to this in some other state aside from Nevada, a state or a commonwealth, then I'm going to leave that to you. Actual research left to the listener. There's just too many things. It's something that we could talk about over a long term. And in fact, that was part of the origin story of Project ACT, which I will mention briefly in a moment. But that was the autonomous cohort transformation effort to, back in the day when there were brigades, to work or talk to, or at least share resources, not legal advice, but help people who were interested in pursuing some independence as standalone cohorts. So the autonomous cohort transformation, turning a brigade into an independent cohort. That was that origin story. Anyway, let's get started so we can get finished. It's a busy week ahead. The summary of today's episode, we touched on this a bit. Let me right out the gate, let me fix that typo, not a but, a bit. We touched on this a bit in a previous episode about cohorts, similarly named, but it is actually quite important if you plan to form a nonprofit or similar business entity to decide where the line between the business and the volunteering is and make sure that line is clear for a few reasons, actually. The links for today's episode, as they are every week, so nothing no additional links this week. You can probably skip ahead about the same amount of time as usual, whatever that, I don't even know what it is, but probably 4 to 5 minutes. 4 minutes, probably. Let's see. Okay, I'm going to eyeball it. Okay, so Innovate for Vegas Foundation homepage. That's Innovate, F-O-R, Vegas, one word, .org. InnovateForVegas.org is our foundation homepage. Accept no substitute. You can see what we're up to. Basically, there's a multi-page design in our future. Our web traffic is single digits, small, double digits. It's not a huge concern at the moment, but hopefully it will become as we commence that 4th year and some new cool activities. ProjectAct.info, that's project hyphen, the key next to the 0 on your keyboard, project act, ACT.info for more information about the Project ACT. Currently, the autonomous cohort tessellation, but still lingering the autonomous cohort transformation idea. But the tessellation is or will be a catalog of civic volunteer organizations or possibly other types of groups and cohorts and whatnot. That's right there in the name. So cohorts doing their thing, sometimes civic volunteer, sometimes something else. And then the things that they're actually working on to enable and encourage discovery. How about that? And connection, communication, and collaboration between all of these parties. That's the idea. agileforvolunteers.org, agile, F-O-R, volunteers, all one word, .org is our take on the original notions of agile for planning and executing on initiatives, component projects, whole team, communication, reaching out beyond an organization for collaboration elsewhere, maybe discovered in the tessellation. And these are, of course, open initiatives. Hopefully we'll get other people to participate. Still too early days, not receiving the attention they really need, but I think that's about to change, luckily. Finally, the always future Mastodon.Vegas, Mastodon for Vegas. Mastodon, of course, I don't want to call it a Twitter alternative, but people will think of it that way. A short post social media platform decentralized in the so-called Fediverse. Mastodon.Vegas coming soon, as always. It's a part of our larger information awareness strategy in the MyMuni and Welcome projects. Also probably a donation driver, but more on that in another episode into the future, hopefully the soon future, near future. So that's just under 3 minutes of me talking about this, the links. So for future reference, call it 3 minutes. So last week, to get started, we talked about cohorts, groups of one or more people who want to take on some issue, challenge, gap, probably local, hopefully local, in fact, which turns into an ongoing effort with some structure and maybe some paperwork that you have to file. So in other words, you start off with 2, 3, 4, 5, hey, we should try to fix this thing, or we should try to learn more about this other thing, or take a stand on something, attend some meetings, and so on. And that might turn into, we should keep doing this. We were effective. We enjoyed this. It was useful and fruitful. A cohort could be like a club, but it could also be a fiscally sponsored project. It could be a nonprofit corporation, as we are. It could be a tax-exempt organization, as we also are. There are probably other options as well. Today, we can talk a bit more about the formation of an actual nonprofit corporation. This is the case in Nevada. Your particulars may be different where you are, and pursuing an IRS determination to operate as a tax-exempt charitable organization, which we did and we are. So first, why? Why do all this? We talked about this a bit around the cohorts in general last week, but why form a nonprofit corporation? Why obtain an IRS determination letter and tax-exempt status? A 501c3 public charity in our case, and there are not really too many choices. I will leave that for a tax professional and someone familiar with the 501A section on 501c3 entities. Administratively, there are probably more reasons than these, but our reasons included, since we did this in 2022, a long-living organization not dependent on fiscal sponsor or other encumbrances to external organizations. Encumbrances to? Are we encumbered by? I think we're encumbered by external organizations, as was the case with the brigade system, for example. So we never rebooted as a brigade. We were not dependent again or in any way on the brigade system or structure that was then sunset. So that had no direct impact on us, for example. So standalone, you can continue without somebody else saying, oh, we got bad news for you. I mean, that could still happen, but not because you are completely dependent on being a part of a different organization that doesn't have your best interests at the fore. A certain level of credibility in general is a possibility, like a training certificate or similar. And I don't mean to diminish anything. I'm just saying that, hey, we are a nonprofit. We're a public charity. These are accomplishments. They require some effort, some time, some energy put in, some money, some fees, and so on. Doing all this stuff are actions that require you to care. You actually have some motivation and you want to move down that path and you are committed to it. That's sort of indicated by these things. Now, it doesn't say it's a 100% guarantee that, oh, we're a nonprofit, we're going to be around forever. but it is more than we're a club. You can open a banking account more easily because you are a legal entity and you have a treasurer and you have a president and paperwork and signatures and you have a business ID and the list goes on. And that may vary where you are, but Nevada, we have all those. We're a Nevada business ID. We have an EIN. We're a tax exempt organization, the IRS database. All of these things can be verified for conducting business, if you like. And so some legitimacy, some credibility, etc. We're a member of the club, so to speak. In your locality, as is the case here in Vegas, you'll probably come across others pursuing related goals, maybe directly related, maybe adjacent, maybe orthogonal. These are opportunities for collaboration among a group of people and organizations who have a similar level of commitment and implied credibility. So everybody's gone through the filing of the nonprofit. And by the way, in Nevada, the nonprofit corporation is actually pretty easy, but it is something you have to do. You either do it or don't do it. And if you've gone through that and then IRS determination, again, you've put in that effort and you're conducting an actual business. So it's not a club. It's not a hobby. It's a business. It's an actual, in our case, a corporation, nonprofit corporation. Section 82, I believe it is. Section 80. It's 82. I think it's Section 82. So there you go. We're literally in business. Donations and transparency, also important. Soliciting donations as a public charity is not a surprise to anyone. Nobody will ask, what's this about? Oh, you're a charity. Okay. That's mostly true. Reporting, not only via tax filings, but in general, is the norm. Ideally, your organization aimed at civic volunteerism and engagement will take that engagement part and run with it, seriously. Communicating with the people you are sort of working for, reporting on donations and whatnot. Now, our 2025 fiscal year ending, 2025, so ending in 3.5 weeks, I think we had a total of like $29 in donations. I could pull those numbers up, but they were in $1 and less donation amounts. I can't explain that. They were essentially anonymous donations through our donate button on our website. For some reason, there were some that were 50 cents. A lot of that goes to Stripe. But end of the day, we did get some donations. We were not at all attempting to drive donations, but if anyone were to ask, we received less than $100 in donations. That's not an amount that I'm overly concerned about. But as we end our third year, we are no longer capped at $50,000 in gross receipts per year per our 1023-EZ filing to receive our IRS 501c3 determination. So we can actually start pursuing donations of reasonable amounts, more than $1, hopefully, to conduct some events like hackathons. We can get back into that. Everybody wants free food. Can't go without food when you're at a hackathon. That's been empirically determined. But it enables a few things. We could even get T-shirts and other promotional, like, hey, look at what we're doing, and look who's doing it, type of thing. So part of our overall purpose, and then the mission or missions that we are pursuing in different along different paths from that central purpose, could benefit from having some funds available to enable certain things, including, not to leave off the tech side, the cloud resources if we needed some, or subscriptions or physical materials, maybe if we want to do some actual 3D printing, for example, or any kind of printing of paper, flyers, banners. The list goes on and on. So there's all kinds of opportunity coming, starting with our fourth year, no cap, and some ideas on the table. And then, of course, free and discounted resources. That's always a good thing, right? Always nice. There are many, I should say, only sometimes aimed at nonprofits, most often aimed at actual determined 501c3 charitable organizations, and even then, not all of them, as in not all 501c3 organizations are created the same. My favorite example, because it's just glaringly obvious and everybody can track it down, Google for nonprofits. And I assume they still call it that. Hopefully they've updated it. 3 years ago, when we were just getting started, we formed our Nevada Nonprofit Corporation in June of 2022. we would not receive our determination until October. And even though it's retroactive to your date of formation, when we reached out to TechSoup, which is the company or whatever it is that manages the Google for nonprofits vetting and subscription management, I suppose you could say. So you contact TechSoup and you say, hi, we're a nonprofit and we would like to apply for a Google for Nonprofits free workspace account. And they say, this is available for 501c3 public charities or charities. I don't know about public. And with the exception of 2 or 3 bulleted, are you this type of a charity or this type, and so on. You can check that out for yourself. So the bottom line is it's Google for nonprofits, but it's actually Google for 501c3 charities only. So it's something to keep in mind. And they don't go back in time and say, oh, you were paying cash out of your own pocket, even though you are retroactively a charity. Well, congratulations. No refunds. Practically, so those were some of the administrative benefits. Practically, going through the process and operating as an actual legal entity is part of a plan to maintain the efforts into the future. This is completely editorial, but it may be. It's like the difference between if you're in a long-term relationship with someone and you decide to get married. Well, what's the difference? Many people will tell you there is a difference, actually. When you go into any business with somebody, well, we should put this in writing and make it official. And actually, well, there are things that come from actually committing to something formal. There is an explicit legal expectation that records will be kept, meetings, at least one per year, will be held amongst the governance. Finances will be disclosed and actually kept track of. And if this is known by all, a common set of rules at the outset, there need not be any head scratching or shoulder shrugging later. So once you've formed a nonprofit and you have board members and different roles and people kind of either understand or can ask or be, I'll put quotes around told, advised perhaps, for the good of the company. Like there's a certain amount of responsibility and some expectations that those responsibilities will be either met or passed on to the next person. So there's an expectation that people will do the required things, keep the organization moving forward for the long term, and spend time not wondering about these things, but on the purpose and on the mission or missions. So basically, once you form a nonprofit, maybe a public charity, for example, as we have, after that, if someone were to say, so are we, you can say, hey, you don't even have to ask. All the paperwork is here, our business ID, our filings, our documents. We don't have to spend time on that. That's been done. That part is taken care of. Let's focus on what we want to accomplish, not on who's supposed to do what and when and how and what's going on and so on. So practically, and yes, administratively, but practically, it sets expectations and it hopefully will make or provide some clarity to people who want to participate on the business side. Or if you are asking people to participate on the business side, you don't have to define what a charity is, for example. So practically speaking, we are a nonprofit public charity. Okay. So there are some presumptions that can be made. There are some resources that can be examined. We don't have to try to talk about what those mean. That's what they are. So practical. But speaking of the business side, so there's the corporation and then there's the actual work. And work is not a great word. I mean, it's correct, but it sounds like, I like to use the word effort. I think that softens it up a little bit. It's still work, but work sounds like manual labor, perhaps. But effort is sometimes just caring about how something functions. Anyway, we won't have to go down that board, down that path too much. But there's the corporation, and then there's the actual things we want to accomplish, the things in our purpose. So your configuration may vary. I am speaking of the Innovate for Vegas Foundation at the moment, as it exists today. Since our organization formed with 3 people in total, we were not thinking big just yet, but from the outset, we did decide that ours would be 100% volunteer without compensation for directors, advisors, nor for their governing staff, the president, secretary, treasurer, and others, which means we do not have some people in positions of authority asking for or directing the efforts of volunteers. We are all volunteers, top to bottom. Let me get some water real quick here. contributing one's volunteer time, effort, and expertise. And I do like to be explicit about that because volunteer time is sometimes really easy. Volunteer effort is probably the real part of volunteering. It takes time, but you can sit in a chair and watch paint dry, and that's volunteer time, right? But the effort to make something happen, to have to deliver an accomplishment of some sort along the purpose, along the goal, the mission, and of course, bringing your expertise to all this. If you really know how systems work, if you really know how the process works to form a company or to maintain or to perform outreach, or there's all sorts of moving parts. So you bring all this to the foundation. It can take many forms. And so can a particular nonprofit org chart. So all these things can vary. Ours for the first 3 years so far, and it's still so far, is fairly straightforward. We have directors. The directors on our board of directors are choosing a path into the future with guidance now and then to stay on that path or consider detours for the furtherance of our purpose, which I read earlier, but it is to enable and encourage ideation, innovation, and implementation to make our communities better. So come up with cool ideas, come up with cool solutions, and then make them happen and make our communities better, elevate our communities. Our communities could be local, they could be anywhere on the planet or anywhere else. So the directors are just trying to steer the ship. There's really not much to ask. We don't have a $1 million endowment or anything. So it's pretty light effort, just thinking. And mostly directors will ideally just be a part of telling the story and so on. So the effort may be small. The time may be minimal. The expertise comes from knowing, I'm interested in this thing succeeding. And one way to do that is to tell people that I come into contact with about this cool effort that volunteers are making to elevate our communities. The president handles day-to-day outreach and engagement, telling the story to anyone interested. I would say if some other entity from some other place wanted to engage with the Innovate for Vegas Foundation, they would reach out to the president. They would send an email to the president email address and start that conversation, and it would probably proceed from there. I always remember the president of my college, Harvey Mudd College. We had him over for, what was his name? Henry Riggs at the time, since passed. So rest in peace, Mr. Riggs, President Riggs. I think he he taught a class. I don't know if he was an actual professor, but he taught a class maybe. But he told us, I mostly talk to people about fundraising. I talk about the school. I talk about what we're hoping to achieve in the future. So his was really a handshakes and asking for money and telling the story and so on, day to day. So the president is sort of a point of contact, I think. The treasurer manages our finances, of course, donations, incoming, tax returns filed, and so on. Not much to do so far, but hopefully that will change. The secretary manages board meetings and taking notes and minutes and so on, publishing an agenda, managing the minutes and the notes and so on, documents. So general record keeping, and is the point of contact for local, state, and federal filings. So when we file our annual list at the end of June, it will be from the secretary of the Innovate for Vegas Foundation. Anything else, we find someone who is interested and who wants to do anything else. The pay is always the same. So we have like events and media. So these are like, individual roles in DevOps to manage our online resources, media to manage things like this audio program, and social media engagement and so on, events to manage our calendar and outreach and so on. So coordinating and planning and so on. So yeah, it's like a real business. It's like a real company. The pay is horrible. The benefits, though, TBD. Long tail. I laugh, but it really, you just have to want to be involved in something that might end up being bigger than you imagined. That's the idea. And if not, well, I'll learn something along the way. Then there's the day-to-day work. The reason we are the Innovate for Vegas Foundation. This is all volunteer stuff, all of it. Also volunteer time, effort, and expertise. And to be honest, there is essentially zero expectation that the directors and the other staff will, in addition to their business responsibilities, that's what they're here for, will also offer up more of their time and effort to pursue initiative work. Now, you'll note I left off expertise in that version because not every person making the business of Innovate for Vegas Foundation function. I'm the treasurer. Am I necessarily going to be a coder or a creative person in some way? Or will I have the expertise to bring to an initiative? Maybe not. I'm the treasurer. That's why I'm here. I'm not here because I am able or interested. They could not be interested. That's totally fine. Not every person making the business of Innovate for Vegas Foundation function is automatically expert in the various parts of any initiative. Maybe, maybe not. You never know. It's up to them. The business exists and people operate it to enable the other volunteer initiatives to proceed. There is certainly no demand and no expectation that those on the business side must also participate actively on the purpose side, if I can make that distinction. So one enables the other, but the other gives purpose and reason for the one, if that makes sense. Like without the people operating the foundation, there's no foundation. The foundation provides a platform on which volunteers might pursue the development of initiatives in the various parts. And that gives reason for the foundation to exist. So it's a circle of life. So the business contributors, this is sort of interesting and might be kind of inside baseball at the moment. And we don't really have anything to point to as an example just yet, but soon maybe the first one. Agile for Volunteers will kind of fall into this category. That distinction I just offered should lead to one question at least. If everything we are doing is open source and transparent, and if attribution is important, and it's a requirement that I've actually discussed in previous episodes, where are the business people in the initiative output? In other words, is the events person contributing to some initiative? Is the treasurer? Well, I'm going to offer at least three possibilities here. Obviously, if there's a hands-on contribution, that's easy, and contributors and contributions can take just about any form. Contributors in any form and contributions take any form, including testing, the equivalent of marketing, and so on. It could be anything, not to mention primary development efforts. And this does not automatically mean writing code, but it could be a lot of things. So it could be any of a variety of ways to contribute directly to different initiatives. And that's the effort and time parts, most definitely. Could also support contribution. Our foundation exists and is in good standing. That's true today and thus far anyway, thanks to the efforts of members of the board of directors and the staff and anyone else making our foundation go. So, special mention, enabling contributors, the business, the foundation, governance, names, individuals who want to be named as contributors. Of course, why not? That's part of how we're doing all this. And then emeritus contribution. This is not immediately obvious, but if I'm a director during the development of some initiative and it explodes into some amazingly useful and popular thing sometime later, like, I've moved on, I've served a couple of years, I'm on to other things. But that thing that we were bouncing around and kind of starting out back then has become the next cool whatever. I'm being purposely vague because who knows? There is a possibility that I played some role in those early days and months, and that still counts. So generally speaking, we would favor giving credit for contribution of effort of any form. And of course, there would be, if needed, some conversation about that. But generally speaking, we would start off believing that, if you were in any way affiliated, you should at least get a mention. Your name should be in there somewhere. This is important because of our business model, wherein those who work for free as volunteers are part of successes that become viable external ventures. Maybe this is not the actual language we would need to arrive at, but if we imagine, so this is just an example, this is not a binding description. If we imagine an initiative as having shares, those who contribute as volunteers in any capacity would be entitled to their fraction of the total shares, and that would depend on some contribution metric or some agreed upon distribution as they relate it to some deployment. So at some point, if something catches on, I have shares from when we first got started, and I have shares because I spent 90% of my life getting this going. Those would be different amounts, different fractions. Ideally, a fair outcome would result. I say that with fingers crossed, but that's the goal. That's something our board of directors would probably have some input on, so that we would be transparent and thoughtful. Hey, speaking of transparent and thoughtful, the labs concept, this is something I've been speaking about since we first got started 3 years ago, 2022. We actually started in January, February timeframe. And I do not actually want people to work for free. I don't want them to work for free as volunteers, but I want to work with people willing to work for free. And I hope they want to work with others that want to work for free also. We have all encountered something often in the world of tech that is called a beta or early release or something similar, sometimes by some experimental part of an organization. For example, Google Labs. The icon, and I've seen this in several places, so it's not a Google only thing, is like a little Florence flask. What's the triangular flask? It's Erlenmeyer and Florence. Let me just try to be correct here. Florence flask. No, Erlenmeyer flask. Okay, so Erlenmeyer, the Florence flask, I always try to remember it's the flat. It's round flat. Florence flat. So, but it should stick in my mind. It's because it's spherically shaped with a flat bottom. The Erlenmeyer flask. Let me make sure I have Erlenmeyer. Aha, I knew that. So Erlen, Erlenmeyer flasks. They're kind of shaped like a triangle with a flat bottom. Anyway, so the icon is often an Erlenmeyer flask. Erlenmeyer. Possibly with some sort of a liquid sloshing around in it. Okay, there I am. Okay, so as is fairly typical in the world of open source, it is possible to build a sustainable business for profit even on top of open source efforts. And in our case, we want to make sure that there are avenues to connect those for-profit efforts with the people who make the open source parts happen as volunteers. Now, this doesn't mean we must extract revenue from everything. That's a different and problematic business practice that has been making itself ugly and known lately in the open source world. But this is really more of how can we present an opportunity so that the people who made this happen can receive something in return over time, something other than, and not to discount this, but something other than a line on their resume or good feeling for a job well done, right? Those are important. But if there's a way to build something on top of open source efforts over time, then great. And people who contribute to those should be a part of that. That's the plan. An example I often refer to is our very first initiative, Open Transit, which could very easily be spun off to become an ad-driven or subscriber platform, an app or something for consumers of public transit services, maybe here in Vegas or maybe elsewhere, depending on how flexibly we write it, which is one reason why I tell people we should not write or develop or plan for Vegas only things. We can think bigger than that. As a standalone product with customers and the need to engage with those customers. As soon as you have customers and customer service, you're taxing the volunteer business model. And it's time to start thinking of, having people actually committed to a job, making a product function and interacting with the customers who use that product. So spin-off. A variation or maybe an evolution of that path might be working with our local transit entity, the Regional Transportation Commission of Southern Nevada, for example, as a vendor, which would, of course, make sense to do as a separate legal entity with its own management, budget, staff, and employees. First refusal for the jobs at that entity would go, or probably would go, just so I have an out, if some circumstance arises. So none of this is legally binding. These are aspirational notions. But these would go to the people who have made all of this happen. They're the experts in how this stuff works anyway. They essentially already have the roles. So in a proper spinoff that becomes a vendor entity with a business relationship for some transportation commission, et cetera, for the open transit initiative, deployments, and so on. These are all things that would be sensible. And then, of course, you need to convert that into reality. So we'll have another episode when we get to that point. We can also operate some initiatives as donation drivers and proofs of concept. One of the things I have mentioned many times now, the geographically focused Mastodon server, I mentioned it in the link section today again, that we will deploy can be operated by our volunteers as a donation driver without actual subscribers, which enables a live public-facing teaching platform, how to maintain a public social media platform, including moderation policies and so on, to attract attention and donations without quite the same requirements as having paying customers or subscribers. This matters and is a disclosure item as part of our transparency with our community. So in other words, when you donate through the Mastodon server that we will be deploying, you are not a paid subscriber because you don't have to pay, you don't have to donate anything to use the service. But donating helps the organization maintain the server and provide other educational programs and other projects and initiatives that we're pursuing and so on. So you're supporting the organization that is supporting the server. And then, volunteers who want to learn about cloud operations and DevOps and deployments and real-time updating of software to reduce downtime. All these things are very practical, right? And once you have a public service that people are actually using, you have some motivation to get it right. So it's a very practical education vehicle to do something like that. So that's in the plan too, and all that would encompass. And that brings us to, I didn't want to go on for hours and hours. I talk about this stuff all the time. I just wanted to kind of lay down some notions here that are a little bit more specific. So why do all of this? And I always talk about ROI. Why am I doing this? Is there something? It doesn't have to be, what am I getting paid? Am I getting free food? Am I getting money in my pocket? But there should be some reason to do something so that you, first of all, so you're doing it. If I don't get a return, maybe I'm not doing what I thought I was doing. Maybe it's not actually working. Ideally, those in the business side do so with some long tail in mind. A return on their volunteer time, effort, and expertise over time in a form or forms that they may not be obvious or even financial. There's a large part of my own motivation in this area, which I may have covered in a previous episode of this program titled Motivation of All Things. And that was, I think, 2 weeks ago. But this is not a universal thing, nor my only motivation. So it's not universal among every person, and it's not my only motivation to do interesting things. There's always the classic, it looks good on my resume. It'll look good on your resume to do this. There may be some points or other record keeping for volunteering with some schools, organizations, or even professions. They will sometimes somehow provide a benefit to people who do volunteer their time and opportunities to learn and build and develop job and life skills through collaboration and real world problem solving. And oh yeah, don't forget innovation, sometimes lost in the fuss. Even long time experienced people in any field can learn from others. Mentoring can work in any direction, and that's always a possibility. Finally, obviously, there are the possibilities that come from real people working together to solve real problems or offer real, even interesting innovation to communities at large, local or otherwise. You can imagine a sticker or a t-shirt or a banner perhaps announcing to everyone, we did this. And if that's not a good reason, I don't know if there are any others. But it is important. The conclusion of this is that I think it's easy to commingle or make a little bit less obvious the differences between operating a nonprofit corporation or like it's a business. It's not quite the same as trying to operate a restaurant or the next Google, but it is a business. You have to keep the lights on and so on. Usually the costs can be kept really low or nearly zero. Our costs are not zero, but they aren't a lot. And hopefully the business side can remain the business side and can operate and enable the purpose side, if you like, right? The purpose of our organization is not to have board meetings and accept donations and pay bills and file tax returns and so on, right? That's not at all the purpose. That's how a business functions. Those are sort of tacit. I had to use a vocabulary word from my high school English teacher. Tacit. So of course you do those things, and having people that can take those responsibilities and run with them is important. It might all be one person. That's a hard thing. And then the other side of the coin is actually pursuing the purpose. So in our case, to enable and encourage ideation, innovation, implementation to make our communities better. That's not what the treasurer is focused on, right? For example, now the treasurer could put down the calculator and the eye shade with turn off the green lamp and, 3D print something or write some documentation or test a new app or whatever, right? That is directly participating, but everyone is participating in a different way on what I will simplify to two sides of the same coin, which is the operating the business and pursuing the purpose of that business, right? So I think that's really easy to confuse, or it's really easy to not sort of like the equivalence is really difficult sometimes to map out. Like, oh, are you doing this? How come I'm the only one doing that? Well, because there are things happening that you don't know about because you shouldn't have to worry about them. I'm here to worry about those things. You know how to do the thing you're working on. Communication is key in that case if somebody is concerned about these things. So operating your business and communicating with the people pursuing the purpose side is probably important. And by probably, I mean definitely. It's not something that is always prioritized because, to be honest, especially in the world of volunteering, not every volunteer wants to know exactly what the operating details are of a company. They should be available. You can call it a pull rather than a push, right? The information's available as a document on a shared hard drive somewhere, or that could be found or published on a website or in a GitHub repository or somewhere in a repository. Generally speaking, someone who's volunteering their time, effort, and expertise should be able to say, what is this a real corporation? Are you legitimately structured, and are you active, right? Have you withdrawn, or have you been, are you defunct, right? If you're still a thing and I can contribute money or I can contribute my time, if I can be a part of this, what are you doing? What's your mission? What's your goal? What's the purpose? Who's doing what? So there's a whole bunch of transparency and communication that are important, and especially in connecting the two sides. And you can argue that there's more than two sides or whatever you'd like, but for the purposes of this, people that are people driving the ship, and there are people that are spending their time on the ship. How about that? Right? You have your crew and you have your passengers. You have the people that are here to do stuff, and there are people that are here to enable the people to do stuff. Any number of ways you want to look at it. And I think it's important to have conversations about this and to involve and invite people who are interested in pursuing this sort of stuff over the long term and the long tail. I will say our first outreach for community advisors to participate in conversations and meetups and whatnot, the very first question was, what's the compensation? None. This is all volunteer. So, that's an easy way to filter people out. If they're here for the money, there are other places to go for money. This is a longer view, a longer vision, a longer tail, and there are different ways to get something back. The compensation could come in different forms, but we know what they were asking about. But anyway, I just wanted to kind of spell some ideas out. This could be even more episodes into the future. This might be an interesting way to have conversations with people from other organizations. I would like to see that happen more often, especially the nascent and recently formed cohorts that may not be pursuing the old brigade model. We are only very remotely a former brigade. All of the people who were involved with the Code for Vegas organization when it was part of Code for America, it was kind of informally a brigade. I don't know if they had that structure in place and the terminology in place, but Code for Vegas in the early days, part of Code for America, when we relaunched, aside from Sean Looker, the co-founder and co-captain of Code for Vegas, being a board member during our first year, we have no specific ties to a brigade model or mindset. So we're essentially an independent cohort that has formed a nonprofit that is a tax-exempt organization, public charity, 501c3, attempting to pursue our purpose and work with and elevate volunteers and communities to make everything better. Lofty goals, to be sure, and all for free. On that note, I will leave you and wish you the best. And if you have a version of this story that you'd like to share, we do guests. We haven't done it in a long time, but a return to guest conversations might be in the offing. I hope so. Don't hesitate to reach out. media@innovateforvegas.org. Or you can contact me. I'm on our website, dhugo@innovateforvegas.org. I have a card on our website with my picture and my links. Feel free. Take care. Thank you for listening as always. Cheers.